Hello, we're going to pick up with the second part of our walk around west of St Paul's, going around Smithfield, etc. We're picking up where we left off in part 2. Now, I'm going to try a different microphone placement today, so hopefully be able to speak to you a bit more, but let's see how this goes. So like I say, we're picking up where we left off. So there is the oldest house in London. Just, I'll get out of the way of the fence. There we go. And just walking across the street, we are now in the churchyard, one of the oldest churches, and certainly in the city of London. There's the churchyard. And then if I swing around, you'll be able to see it, hopefully in all its glory. Alright, so here we go. A bit overhung by branches, but all the same. So this is St Bartholomew the Great. And obviously, as named after St Bartholomew, and its origins date from 900 years ago. So there was what is believed to have been the king's jester, a man called Rahir, not sure quite how it was pronounced. But 1123, he had been on a pilgrimage to Rome, and there are several different origin stories that seem to have been lost in the mists of time a bit. So basically, he did have a period where he almost died. So one has it that he was coming back on the boat across the channel, stormy, all the rest of it, and St Bartholomew appeared and told him that if he sort of came back here and founded a church, then he would be saved. Different story has it that while he was in Rome, he contracted malaria, had a vision that St Bartholomew came to him, and the third one said that while he was in Rome but attending the funeral of a friend, that his friend came back and told him that he needed to basically atone for his sins and do something in terms of founding a church. Slight shades of Christmas Carol about that one, so I'm not sure which is the accurate one. Like I say, different books give you different stories, but the basic story is this guy had a conversion, believed St Bartholomew had told him to come and build this place. And because he was close to the king, he came back, told the king the story, and obviously very religious times, and you didn't mess with God. And so the king granted him a piece of land to build a church. And at this time, this land was apparently, wasn't that great, marshes, fens, all the rest of it. And he and some monks that he gathered around him set about sort of firming up the land. They got the locals to sort of dump rubbish and, gravel and soil and everything in the land to sort of firm it up, and then set about building the church, and as I say, called St Bartholomew the Great. And as was the way with a lot of the old churches, a hospital was attached to it, and we'll see that shortly as St Bart's, which is the oldest sort of continuous hospital in England. So that's been here since around about the same time. But if you ever get a chance to come over and visit this church, do, and go in. They charge, I think it's about £5, something like that, if you're not attending the service. But it's absolutely beautiful inside. In fact, I've got some footage somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. But I have to say, when I first walked in, I had two thoughts. My first one was, wow, this is stunning. And the second one was, this was just made for an Errol Flynn movie. Because I'd grown up, watching those sort of things on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and him and Basil Rathbone doing sword fights. And obviously, the movies were set on, places like this. This is a Norman church. This was only 50 years after William the Conqueror, or 60 years after William the Conqueror had invaded England. And this is a Norman church. And when you go in, it's very, very evident that. And there has been movies filmed here. So, Four Weddings and a Funeral, the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, Most recently, I think, would have been Transformers, the one with Anthony Hopkins. Don't ask me, I can't keep track of them. I don't tend to watch those movies. But there's been numerous other movies as well. When I was in having a look around, I was lucky. They'd just finished some sort of, occasion. And one of the people that either worked or volunteered there came over and rattled off a whole list of movies and various other things. But it is, its age shows it's beautiful. So that's St. Bartholomew the Great. I'd love to go into lots more detail, but it's a Sunday morning, not even sure if it's open yet. And obviously it's a working day for them, so maybe another time. So I'm going to go out the gatehouse here. Now, I did tell the story of the gatehouse a bit in some of my shorts, or one of my shorts, but we'll talk about it a bit more. So basically, we got several different ages here, based on what you're looking at. Now you can see there that gatehouse bit there above the door. You can see don't know if you can see the two dates. Left hand side, there it says 1240. That one says 1932. I think that's when it was restored. But obviously it's 13th century origins, as does the archway that we're looking at there. Now, let's see. It says, this gatehouse was restored in 1932 to the use of the church in memory of the two brothers, Sir Austin Webb and Alfred Webb, also Frederick Dove, who worked together in the restoration of the fabric of the church for over 40 years. And I know these gates, they date from then. And they were recently, just in the last 2 or 3 years, they were sort of repainted and jazzed up. Now, how weird is that? Those of you not familiar with Northern Ireland won't know, but the logo for Northern Ireland, the flag, is the red cross with a red hand in the centre of it, called the Red Hand of Ulster. And there you go, there's a red hand on that shield. And if I just scroll up here, and like I say, these were recently worked on by specialists. If you go to the website, it'll tell you about it. Oh, I like this one. Got the black lines on it. Right. So the archway that we're looking at here, let's go back up. The archway here, that dates from the 13th century. That's why that sign inside said 1242. The church itself, 1123. So what's that, 900 years now? And if I show you the gatehouse and all its glory, there you go, it's from 1500s. Now, the thing was, they didn't know this was here. I explained this, I think, in the short. In part one of this walk, we saw the square where the bomb fell, the Zeppelin bomb by Heinrich Matthey. And it had a, huge explosion, and what it did was it revealed this gatehouse, because everybody had forgotten this Tudor gatehouse was here, because prior to the bomb exploding in 1915, the front of this Tudor gatehouse looked like that. If you ever look at any old photos, it looked like that, because they had put a facade, like a brickwork facade, because obviously the Tudor look must have went out at some point, and they covered it up. And then with the bomb in 1915, part of it fell off, and then they set about, taking the rest of it off and showing it in all its sort of true glory. Now, let me just come back down. So, as I say, that's the entrance to St. Bartholomew the Great in West Smithfield. Now, this area here, West Smithfield, this really is one of those, like, London has layers of history all over it, obviously, especially in the city, but here more so. A bit like where we finished the Spitalfields tour, where we went down into the crypt, if you watched that one, and you can see, it told the story of all the different layers of London that had been found whenever they had dug down. And this is another one of those spots where just history just repeats it, or not repeats it, but historic events happened. Lots of them here. If this was a sci-fi book, it would be a portal to another dimension. If it was a fantasy novel, it would be a place where different worlds collide. And in historical terms, that's what this place is, West Smithfield. So I'm just going to show you some different plaques here which tell stories of different things, because lots of things took place here. So here's one of them. So this plaque relates to a big revolution. Is that not sitting straight, or is it just me? Okay, so there was a sort of an attempted revolution, 1381. So what had happened was Richard II had been raising a lot of taxes, a bit like poll taxes, and people, plane coming over, let's hold on. Let's hope it's not a bomb. Okay, so yes, Richard II. He had been raising lots of poll taxes, very unpopular, and the people had had enough. And there was a big rebellion. Lots of people sort of gathered together. I think it was, don't quote me, but I think they might have come up from Kent, and it was all under the leadership of a religious guy called John Bull, and another guy called Wat Tyler, who firmly believed there shouldn't be any kings and queens and lords. Everybody should be equal. And they got to this place. I'll read that in a minute. They got to this place, and basically Richard II, who was only 14 at the time, and some of his courtiers, and sort of his lords, met the rebels here. There was a field here. This was all just fields. It was known originally as the Smooth Field. That's how you get Smithfield. And they met them here, and it was to basically parley. Basically, you have a chat and work out, what are you not happy about? Well, whenever it got here, Tyler, probably a few of his men had come over closer to the king, away from his main supporter, to discuss things. And apparently at one point he had the impertinence to hold the king's bridle, and then he was waving his dagger about, and he was talking about equality and all that. And one of the king's supporters absolutely lost the plot, and they managed to shield what was happening. Sort of got the horses around and all the rest of it, so the main supporters couldn't see. But one of them stabbed Tyler in the neck, and in the ensuing sort of fracas, he apparently tried to get into the hospital to get sanctuary and to get sorted out, but they dragged him out again and cut his head off. Now, they managed to hide a lot of what was going on from the main bunch of supporters, and then the king and some of his men basically, very brave, but rode straight at the crowd, like thousands and thousands of people, and he was shouting, "You'll have no captain but me." Basically saying, "There's nobody else in charge here, I'm the man." Eventually they basically dispersed, and they took off, and some of the ringleaders were then obviously killed, hunted down by the king and killed. But that was a big major rebellion. They had come up and they had killed some of his top men. They went to drag some of them out of St John's Chapel up at the Tower of London, but he managed to face them down, and that all happened here. So a potential overthrow of the king happened just where we're standing, and that's what this plaque relates to. Now there's some writing, but some of it's in big letters and some of it's in smaller, so let's go with the big ones first. So the big one says, "Things cannot go on well in England, nor ever will, until everything shall be in common, when there shall be neither vassal nor lord, and all distinctions levelled." So that was the belief of Wat Tyler and John Ball. The smaller letters, it says, "At this place on the 15th of June 1381, Wat Tyler, John Ball, and other representatives of the Great Rising met King Richard II. To finalise terms for ending the rebellion. The king had agreed to all the political reforms aimed at alleviating the plight of the people. However, he and his advisors later reneged on that agreement after killing Tyler in the process near this spot. John Ball and many others of the revolt were also later executed. So as I say, very momentous event in the history of England. Now, the other thing this spot was famous for was executions. So, executions, very big things, very public displays by the king, of authority, or queen of authority. They were frequently for, at this spot anyway, they were frequently for religious dissent. So King Henry VIII, he used to burn people for basically not believing in his change from Catholicism to Protestantism. So if you wouldn't sign up and basically say, there's a new religion in town, I'm the head of it, then you were toast. And then his daughter, Queen Mary, whenever, because what happened was, Henry VIII kicked off the Protestant religion in the country, made it the dominant religion. His son Edward, early around about 1550, he took over. And unfortunately, he died within a few years, but he was very much of the Protestant faith. And then his daughter was the opposite. She was a devout Catholic, Queen Mary. And in the short spell of her reign, which if I remember right, was only about 3 or 4 years, in mid-1550s, I think she was about 4 or 5 years. In the short spell of her reign, she managed to burn 277 Protestant martyrs. There we go. Underneath, obviously, a helicopter flight path or something. So, she managed to burn 277 martyrs here. So, not bad, quite impressive. And then Elizabeth, the other sister, or sort of stepsister as it were, whenever she became queen after her, she would burn Anabaptists here. So basically, was choosing the wrong faith could land you in deep, deep trouble. So this plaque is to what's known as the Smithfield Martyrs. So there we go. So I'll try and read what it says. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord. The noble army of martyrs praise thee. And then it says, within a few feet of this spot, John Rogers, John Bradford, John Philpott, and other servants of God suffered death by fire for the faith of Christ. The years 1555, 56, and 57. So there you go. 3 years there. So she was averaging well over 1 a week, burnings here. I suppose they probably did several at once, but even so. And apparently in 1849, just to sort of show you, because it says near the spot, and it must have been, because apparently in 1849, they were digging to do a sewer. And when they were digging down, a few feet underneath, they found lots of bones, charred bones, that had been burnt. And the description basically says opposite the gateway here. So this was obviously the execution spot, and legend has it that Queen Mary used to like sitting in the Tudor gatehouse there, munching on chicken and watching the heretics burn. So they say. I think that's one of those legendary ones, just to paint the picture of her being a very nasty person. Now, so obviously this is the walls of the hospital, and we have another big sort of plaque up here. Inscription: St. Bartholomew's Hospital, founded by here, AD 1102, which I find odd because everything I've read about the church was 1123, and that's supposed to have been around about the same time. Refounded by Henry VIII in 1546. But so what that means is, up until 1539, which is the time of the dissolution, whenever dissolution followed by after the Reformation. So basically, Henry VIII changed the country to the Protestant faith. Lots of the monasteries and priories were disbanded. Some of them absolutely destroyed. Some of the land, sort of sold off, all the rest of it. And St Bartholomew the Great was no different, and neither was the hospital attached to it. So until 1539, it was sort of managed by monks. But then, come 1546, it got reconstituted by Henry VIII. He basically agreed to the hospital firing up again, but not being ruled by anybody religious, certainly not of the Catholic faith. And he basically said, okay, but it's going to have sort of administrators, and they put governors in charge of it, weren't religious. And then it says this building was erected AD 1842. I'm still curious about the contradiction between the dates of the hospital. Maybe there had been a hospital of sorts here prior to the church being founded. Now, and this is the last of our plaques. So any of you have ever seen Mel Gibson in Braveheart? This one's for you. So it says, to the immortal memory of Sir William Wallace, Scottish patriot born at Elderslie, Renfrewshire, circa 1270, who from the year 1296 fought dauntlessly in defence of his country's liberty and independence in the face of fearful odds and great hardship, being eventually betrayed and captured, brought to London and put to death near this spot on the 23rd of August 1305. His example, heroism and devotion inspired those who came after him to win victory from defeat, and his memory remains for all time a source of pride, honour and inspiration to his countrymen. So, there you go. Obviously this is the spot where you come down and can shout, freedom! Right, now, so this thing that's now a underground car park. This, as I say, West Spitalfield, and I did mention the area was once known as the Smooth Field. Apparently, sort of fens and a bit marshy and all the rest of it. By all accounts, the Romans, they used to bury their rubbish here because it was just outside the city walls, and they used to bury their rubbish here. But by medieval times, like as I say, became the Smooth Field. Now, as well as executions and the rebellions and everything else, one of the other things that took place here many times was jousting. This was a big spot in medieval times. So like I think it was 1371, Edward III really wanting to show off to his mistress, a lady called Alice Perrers, and he was like, in his mid-60s. I think she was quite young, but she did go on to become one of the wealthiest women in the land, because apparently, by all accounts, he was besotted with her, and some would have it by that time he wasn't completely with it either. But he organised 7 days of jousting here, all the nights, all the tents, all the, everything. 1390, Richard II, the young kid who had basically chased off the rebellious mobs here, he held another great event here. So his consort had been to Paris, and in Paris the French king had shown off, all the sort of the glory and everything over there. And she came back with stories about, what had happened over in Paris and all the nights and all the rest of it. So Richard then invited them over to sort of have a big event here. So again, apparently I think it was 6 days. There was 60 knights invited from all around what would become the United Kingdom, but it was basically from all over his realm. I think French were invited over too. 60 knights, that would involve the squires, all the different people with them. 60 ladies with their horses and all the rest of it, and apparently they all came, on a big sort of procession up from by the Tower of London, all the way up here, and then spent several days just drinking and doing jousting. So it really was like we see it in the movies, only for much longer, and probably a lot more boozing. But that all happened here. And that's the reason why the street up there is called Giltspur Street, and there's a theory that name comes from basically the spurs on the horses, and Giltspur. So that's the theory behind the name of that street. Some people don't go with it, but it's not bad, is it? So, as I say, lots of history here. If there was a time portal or a sort of a collision between worlds, this is where it would happen. And then 1800s, we get, it's a huge cattle market. Smithfield, as it is finishing this year, but there has been a meat market here for nearly 900 years. It's moving this year, the meat market in the Victorian buildings across the way, because it's going to make way for the new Museum of London, which is moving down there. But if you've been here in the 1800s and before, Lord help you. This was basically a huge cattle market, lots of slaughtering going on. Charles Dickens talked about, the stench and the blood everywhere and all the rest of it. And especially, I believe, not long before Christmas, they used to cram 30,000 animals into this market, ready for slaughter. And apparently it was ankle deep in, various liquids and all the rest of it, not to mention the smell. And, Newgate was basically this end of Newgate, which is the street up to the end here, up to here, was basically known for the smell and the meat and all the rest of it. So I'm going to wander up here. It looks like somebody else is doing a walking tour, which is what I should be doing, but nobody's bought tickets. I will take a wander up. I'll try and avoid this book. I think he's showing them the gateway. So the gateway dates from, I think it's 1732, and I'll do a quick shot of it. But it's Henry the Eighth is above the gateway, because obviously he's the one that refounded the hospital, as we saw in 1546. But it's the only statue of Henry VIII in public in London. So obviously there's various artist impressions, but this is an actual statue of him. And as you'll see, Henry VIII is probably one of the few kings that you would recognise just by his pose. He's basically a bit like Superman. He's got a pose, obviously brought on probably by the clothes he was wearing. But whenever you see him, you can't mistake him for anybody else. So I'm just going to go up here, try and not get in this guy's way. But I'll try and get a decent shot of the archway. There you go, so there's Henry the Eighth. And I have to say, the whole building's quite impressive. Yeah, got the clock. And in there, in the hospital grounds, there is a second church, St. Bartholomew the Lesser. And its parish basically was the hospital grounds, and it's still there. And as it says, it's not as great as Bartholomew the Great, but it's still, an impressive little church. Right. I'll nip over the road. As I was saying, you can see here in that building, it's Giltspur Street, possibly named after the jousters. Now, this is Cock Lane. Now, at some point, I'll do another tour, we'll go down that way and go down the other end of Cock Lane. But suffice to say, the origins of its name relate to some of the practices that used to be done here in medieval times, because apparently at one point this was the only street in the city of London where prostitution was legalised. So yeah, they tended to name their streets very not graphically, but simply. If that's what it was used for, that's the name it got. Now let's see. Okay, let's do the bottom sign first. So this here says the Golden Boy of High Corner. Oh, of course, now I've said it, it's up there, isn't it? So you can see this cherub, this golden cherub. So it says this boy is memory put up for the late fire of London, occasioned by the sin of gluttony, 1666. I'll explain that in a sec. So it says the Boy at High Corner was erected to commemorate the staying of the Great Fire. So basically the fire had burnt 85% of London. Didn't get as far as here. That's why we've still got St Bartholomew. This is where it stopped, I should say. That's why we've still got St Bartholomew the Great and the oldest house. So, which beginning at Pudding Lane was ascribed to the sin of gluttony, when not attributed to the papists as on the monument, and the boy was made prodigiously fat to enforce the moral. He was originally built into the front of a public house called the Fortune of War, which used to occupy this site, was pulled down in 1910. So, okay. I'll just get out of the way, these people suck. So you got to admire. Come on, spin around. There we go. So you got to admire the logic of the religious mindset. So basically, never mind, that wasn't originally called sort of High Corner. It had been called something else. Never, and Pudding Lane, who knows if it was always called Pudding Lane. But basically the thinking was, well, the fire started in Pudding Lane, and pudding is a type of food, and it finished at Pie Corner, and it's a pie, spelt differently, but still says pie. Therefore, that's God's ways of telling us that the fire was because we were eating too much. Good logic. Okay, so that was the thinking there. Now, the bottom half of this sign tells us that the Fortune of War was the chief house of call north of the river for resurrectionists, or grave robbers as we know them. In body snatching days, years ago, the landlord used to show the room where on benches round the walls the bodies were placed, labelled with the snatchers' names, wait until the surgeons at St Bartholomew's could run round and appraise them. So apparently there was a room, and as it says there, the bodies were tagged, and then because you had sort of doing anatomical dissections of bodies wasn't allowed as a general rule of thumb. Only with you can only do it to people who had been executed, or criminals, who had suffered public execution. So there's only a certain amount of them per year was allowed, and because obviously the medical establishment was, had a quest to learn more, and they wanted to sort of dissect bodies to find out how they worked and then create cures and all the rest of it, they took to grave robbing, and they would pay these grave robbers quite handsomely, and if they got nicked, they would then pay for their families to be cared for until they came out of jail and couldn't continue and do it again. Sounds a bit like the mafia when you say it like that. But basically, yeah, this was a big trade, and people would take more and more elaborate steps to try and avoid their loved ones' bodies being stolen and taken to the dissection table. And we're going to see evidence of that just down the street here. So as I say, this is Pie Corner at Cock Lane. The cherub, nobody's actually quite sure where the cherub comes from. Something, because the Fortune of War, which used to stand here, the pub, was a very famous landmark, very famous pub. And some people think it was basically a publicity gimmick by the landlord to put it here, but nobody seems quite certain. Lots of buses up here. It's obviously a turning point for them. And you can see there's another big archway for St. Bart's. There's a, like as we saw in part 1 of this walk, there's a much more modern bit to it behind it. But I think I've got an old artist's impression of just how big how much land it covers. I'll see if I can dig that out and cut it in. So, as I was saying, grave robbers. So this watch house says erected 1791, destroyed 1941. That would have been during the Blitz, Second World War, then rebuilt 1962 as a little reminder of what used to be here. So obviously the watch house is because the graveyard. You have the graveyard behind. And this would have been where they would have hired somebody to keep watch over the graves. Obviously being this close to the hospital, it would have been very tempting. I'm just going to read this. It's quite a claim, considering I've heard the name, but I don't know who he was. To the immortal memory of Charles Lamb, perhaps the most loved name in English literature, who was a blue coat boy here for 7 years. Born 1775, died 1834. Well, personally, I'm not that familiar with Charles Lamb, so to claim that he's most loved name in English literature is quite a claim. And then it says underneath on that black plaque that the memorial was moved from Christchurch Greyfriars on Newgate Street. Yeah. Now, how are we doing? Oh, okay. So I know I haven't actually walked that far, but it just shows you how much history there was in the area. But I think we'll have to end this particular tour here, and then I'll change my battery and we'll pick it up for part 3. More stories. Oh, that's a pity. I used to like the one that's sitting in there, but it's all chained off. Oh, they're doing construction work. Alright, I'm going to go and find somewhere to sit and take my camera apart, and then we will start off here again. Okay. So yeah, hope you're enjoying these walks. If you are, please, sort of spread the word or just subscribe. But if you are, you'll be able to see there should be a link to another one somewhere near me. Alright, so I'll see you shortly, hopefully. And yeah, thanks for watching.